Why, hello, learning nerds. Before we begin today's show, I want to thank our awesome sponsors, with first giving a shout out to Idle Courses Academy. Idle Academy is the first and only authorized vocational school for instructional design and online learning. It includes a comprehensive hands-on curriculum with certifications, credentials, expert coaches, mentors, a community of practice, paid experience opportunities, industry-preferred software access, live events, and ongoing updates. Your entire instructional design career is neatly packaged behind a single login for just $88 a month. Check out all the details at idlecourses.com/academy, and you can use my code Luke for $88 off the yearly membership. Okay, now let's start the show. Hello, learning nerds, and welcome on in to the nerdiest podcast you're going to hear today. I'm your host. My name is Dr. Luke Thompson. I'm a senior instructional designer and program manager, lecturer, author, blogger, and podcaster. Overall, I am your learning nerd because I consider it my mission and my purpose to be able to help you along your learning journey. Whether this is learning about the very basics and fundamentals of instructional design or a little bit more complicated and advanced with different forms of learning techniques and strategies, all are welcomed on into the show. And of course, you can find out more about this show over at drlukehobson.com. Folks, I have two announcements for you. The first is that the course on collaborating and building relationships with subject matter experts is launching again October 30th, not too far away. This course is for instructional designers, educators, aspiring instructional designers, those who want to get ahead of the curve now about how do you work with other people. It sounds simple in theory. However, anyone will tell you who has been inside of a difficult position before working with a SME, and you're like, I don't get it. Why aren't they responding back to me? They're ghosting me. I asked them to do X. Instead, they did Y. Is there a better method of being able to work with people? And the answer is yes. You can learn from my mistakes, which is how this course was actually created, giving you a step-by-step guide, a framework on what to follow, on how to work with other people. So hopefully you don't have these same types of mistakes that I made pop up for you in the future. This is, by the way, a blended learning approach. Almost everything in the course is asynchronous, the activities, the assessments, the content. But of course, I love being able to do live workshops and being able to teach more about this. So there are optional live workshops. If this sounds interesting to you, be sure to sign up. There are only 15 spots left. I make sure to cap it at a certain number because if it gets too high, then I cannot give you as much support as I want to, which is physically not possible to be able to do. So hey, sign up today, and I can't wait to see you inside of the class. And the other announcement is that the third cohort for Instructional Design Institute is going to be launching on December 11th. You probably already know what this is, but just in case, if you are a first-time listener and you haven't heard about this before, this is our 7-week instructional design bootcamp, teaching you everything that you need to know about the fundamentals of designing learning experiences, like with Andragogy, universal design for learning, backward design, evaluation, analysis, and really everything of a sort about how do you create meaningful learning experiences. And of course, we go into career tips. We talk about portfolios and interviews and branding and everything else of a sort. Essentially, I share with you as much as I possibly can, really, within 7 weeks without overwhelming you for everything. And you've probably already seen a bunch of the postings lately inside of LinkedIn because the last cohort just wrapped up and they did incredible. By far, my favorite part about Instructional Design Institute is seeing the transformations from students, from those who walk in from the first time of either saying, I have never done this before, I don't know how to do this, or perhaps they never had a proper type of a mentor or a coach inside of their job and they became an instructional designer and they're like, now what? How do I exactly go about this? And then seeing how much people change by the end of 7 weeks and then looking at their portfolios, designing their courses, everything else, it's truly my favorite thing about Instructional Design Institute. Hence, also, if you see a whole bunch of sappy posts from me just saying about how much and raving about how well these folks have been doing, well, that's why. So if either the course about working with subject matter experts or the Instructional Design Institute and talking about the 7-week bootcamp, if either of those sound interesting to you, go down below inside of the show notes. Be sure to sign up today. Once again, can't wait to see you inside of the class. So folks, let's dive on in to today's topic. And today we're talking about andragogy. I posted on LinkedIn the other day about all of these different ideas that kind of came at me all at once for future blog posts, future podcast episodes, YouTube videos. And one of the clear favorites by far from you was andragogy, which is the science behind how adults learn. Now, andragogy is not to be confused with pedagogy, which that is the science behind how adolescents learn, behind how kids learn. And if you're wondering about why have you never seen the term andragogy before, that everything that you see for different forms of job postings or reading about research or whatever it is, everyone always talks about pedagogy, almost like this is the universal phrase for talking about how people learn. And my friends, that is not true. Pedagogy does not mean everybody. And of course, especially for different types of things that I see on LinkedIn and for different job postings talking about it from a learning and development perspective, where they say for one line about how they want someone who has experience teaching adults, and then the next line is experience talking about pedagogical best practices. And I'm like, well, that's wrong. So today we need to dive on into andragogy. And if you're wondering, are there similarities between andragogy and pedagogy? Yes, there certainly are. But of course, are there differences though? Yes, 100%. I would teach a 5-year-old in a very different way from a 55-year-old. And that's because of the fact that adults have different wants and needs and expectations. Once again, absolutely, positively, there are similarities for things, but we definitely need to talk more about the ins and outs of andragogy and really what makes this so unique. Oh, and by the way, one thing I know that's like really weird, but I definitely want to call out first, is that it is pronounced as andragogy. It is not andragogy. Same thing with pedagogy. It is not pedagogy. I know the way that the spelling is that you want to say it like that, but just a tidbit, just an FYI, that it is andragogy and andragogical methods and things of that sort. So where does andragogy come from? We need to think back to educator and researcher Dr. Malcolm Knowles with his research dating back to the 60s and the 70s, with realizing about how there are different forms of motivations, assumptions, and principles for adult learners. And if we take in mind these different forms of ideas and concepts when thinking about teaching, when thinking about instruction, designing, learning, all of the elements that go into a learning experience, if we take these into consideration, we are going to have a much more successful outcome when it comes to being able to educate adults. And if you have taken a course or a training before where it just didn't connect with you, it didn't resonate, and you're like, is it me? Am I the problem? Because, of course, you are a fabulous educator, and that's what educators do. They always look inward and thinking, we must be the problem here. But in reality, I'm going to assume that course or training or program or workshop or whatever you had to take did not take into consideration best andragogical practices. Over the years, these practices have evolved. Obviously, since we were talking about the 60s and the 70s, one is going to assume that there has been the latest for research and advancements. If you Google andragogy and different forms of the 6 principles, motivations, and everything else of the sort, you're going to get thousands upon thousands of results, which makes it certainly a bit confusing depending upon what you read. Some of these are phrased a bit differently, so that makes it a little bit confusing. Knowles and his colleagues wrote a book called The Adult learner, and I would highly recommend, if you want to really dive on in more of Andragogy, to pick up that book. You can find it on Amazon. I'll put a link inside of a show notes for you, but this is where I've really taken this information from and how I have used it for designing and teaching my own learning experiences. So for this podcast episode, to make it simple, we're going to cover the 6 principles of Andragogy. I'm going to go in order of them. I'll break them down a little bit more to help with everything. And yeah, why don't we get this started? Have you ever taken a course or a training before that had no explanation as to why you were taking it? It just basically appeared inside of your dashboard. You received an email of, hey, you need to be able to take this. And of course, the entire time you're like, well, why? This sounds similar to something that I did before. Or I don't understand. How is this going to help me in my job? It feels like I'm just going through the motions here. I'm trying to be able to check a box and then to move on to the next thing. And if you have ever experienced anything like that before, then you now know about the significance and the importance as to sharing with students and with learners about essentially the why behind the ask, which is the first principle, is the need to know the why. Essentially, adults are thinking about how their time is valuable. They don't have that much of it. So when they are given a task to be able to accomplish something, the first thing that they think about inside of their heads is, well, what's in this for me? How is this going to help me? If I do this, then what is going to be the byproduct of this task? What is going to be the end result? You would probably assume that this would come naturally to be able to share with someone, especially in 2023, about why they're being asked to do something. We're not part of the military. You don't just take commands from a drill sergeant. But at the same time, I know that there are plenty of people out there who do not have the best of leadership or management, and they are told to go do X and never given an explanation as to why. There are different ways about being able to explain about the reason as to why. Hopefully, this was already done before the person had to go into the training or the course or the whatever it is. But if not, then this needs to be inside of the learning experience. For me, I like to be able to do this inside of a learning objectives section of the course. And usually what I'll do is that I will list out the learning objective, and then I will write a blurb below that explaining a little bit more in depth as far as for how this information is going to be used, how it's going to be relevant, and once again, what's inside of this for them. A few different ways about being able to approach this type of a technique, but overall, you need to share with people about the ask and about the why. The next principle is talking about the fact that adults come with a wealth of knowledge. When they are coming into our form of a learning experience, you don't just wipe the slate clean every single time. We have to take into consideration their past experiences, and that's what the second principle is. What we know from research and what I have seen when it comes to my own instructional design courses, the more that you can take into consideration the past experiences of your students and your learners, the more that they are going to proactively want to be involved inside of this learning process. For instance, one of the known steps is being able to allow your students and learners to be able to plan their instruction with you. So let me give you an example. Inside of my courses talking about instructional design, the students pick what their final project is going to be. And inside of these courses, their final project is that they are going to be designing a learning experience of their choosing. It would not make any sense for me to be able to say that you must build a course on X because I said so. That doesn't make a lot of sense. In the real world, as instructional designers, does that happen where you get assigned to be able to build out learning experiences that you do not have a background in? Absolutely. But for those who are just learning about the very essentials and the fundamentals, I want to build up that confidence and that momentum. I want you to be able to pick and choose something that's near and dear to your heart. And that way, I know that you're going to very much so want to be able to see this all the way until the end. Another factor to take in consideration for past experiences is trying to be able to survey people at the beginning before the learning experience happens. So whether this is going to be 4 weeks out, 2 weeks out, or even 1 week out, whatever the time frame is, the more that you can ask your students and learners, the better. And you should be asking them questions about essentially, why are you here? How can I help you? What are your goals? Tell me more about why you signed up for this program in the first place. What would be deemed as a success for you by the end of the next 7-10 weeks, whatever the program is. Getting this information is going to help you out greatly for knowing more about your target audience and incorporating those past experiences into the overall design and flow of your type of course or training or whatever you're building. For instance, I do this with every single course that I have as far as for what I am the instructor. And this is so helpful because of how I have gone into some courses before with one mindset and thinking that people are coming with one type of background. And then all of a sudden I hear that they come with a completely different skill set and a different background. And it's like, oh, I need to be able to make sure that I am addressing these points. If not, then it's not going to be an optimal learning experience for this person. So for Instructional Design Institute, this has happened before where we do have people who want to be able to think more about this from a higher education perspective or a K through 12 perspective, because my background is certainly within education. But by all means, of course, I'm going to be giving examples about working for corporate and freelance and other different forms of sectors as well too, because I want to make sure that anyone who signs up for the course still feels like I am speaking to them and I'm not just glossing over that fact altogether. The next principle is readiness. Readiness goes hand in hand with relevancy. So when you're thinking about your learning experiences and when these people are coming in and you're looking at your designs with everything, is this going to serve them inside of the real world? Now, this can be tricky depending upon your subject matter and what is it exactly you are designing around. But at the end of the day, especially for adults, is that they do not want to learn about theory after theory and process after process. They have to have more concrete, practical examples of, yes, this is a theory, but here's how you actually use it inside of the real world. That's what they really want to know about. And I think any instructional designer will tell you about, if you ask them about, tell me about the ADDIE process. And of course, we in instructional design will explain about ADDIE. And then usually what follows that is explaining about how people use ADDIE in the real world. So you can read an entire textbook on ADDIE. I have one on my shelf that I have read where I'm like, okay, this is an interesting perspective. I'm not sure how much of this is applicable to the real world of things, but I'm going to give this a chance. And certainly, this is very common within learning and development. So whatever you are designing inside of your learning experience, you should really be hitting home examples and instances and talking more about how this is going to serve them on the job, how it's going to help them from a professional development perspective, how essentially it's going to help them out maybe years down the line if we're talking about traditional college age students and what they're going to be going through inside of their academic journey. Overall, it needs to be applicable to the real world. The fourth principle is self-concept. And when I say self-concept, I mean trying to be able to give students and learners more autonomy, flexibility, and freedom when it comes to being able to pick and choose how they want to learn. We seem to forget about this principle quite a bit, where if we have an end destination, there are multiple ways to be able to get there. It's not just to be able to say that the only way for you to be able to travel is by car. Can't you do plane, train, boats? Yeah, there's other ways of being able to get to an end destination. And the same thing goes inside of a learning experience. So let me give you an example. I noticed about how when I start off my courses, I do the typical type of introduction discussion posts where I want people to be able to introduce themselves to one another, because usually it's involved inside of a cohort and these people are going to be working together for the next 7 weeks or so. So yeah, I want them to be able to introduce themselves and to be able to learn a bit more about one another. But I heard one day from a student, and she mentioned about how she has done this same discussion post a million times. And I was just like, Oh, so what you're telling me is that it's a cohort model, but every course is in the cohort inside of his program. So you know these people already. This is going to be, the typical type of thing that you go into. Okay, why don't we change this up a bit? How about you can do the introduction post, or if you choose to be able to do so, you can do a video introducing yourself and mentioning about something that you have not shared before, one fun fact along those lines. As soon as I did that and I changed that up, I started to see a ton of students post videos instead of a typical type of discussion board, and it was different. There was more personality. People actually came a bit alive, a bit more for things. And of course, it was optional. So if you don't want to be on camera, if you find that awkward, or if they were not simply able to actually do this, then of course you can do the writing, whatever works for you. The more options, the more flexibility, the more autonomy, the better that this is going to be. Now, along these same lines, think about everything, the learning activities, the assessments, the content. There is usually not just one way that people need to be able to submit something or to learn from or enjoy. So let's think about content, for example. For many courses that I have taken as a student, it was always that I had to, and this is going to date myself here, but I had to buy the textbook. I had to wait for it to get shipped to me. And then that's how I did the online course, is that the professor said, read chapter 2, page blah, blah, blah. And you're like, all right, let me, whatever, do this. But nowadays, that's really not feasible for everybody. And at the same time, too, not every single method is going to be buy a physical copy of a book. So inside of my courses for the content section, I began to change this up completely, where I was like, yeah, if you want to be able to read a physical book, or if you want to be able to go and to view this as an ebook or with your Kindle, or to be able to pull up an article, a podcast, a webinar, a workshop, whatever, I'm just going to put all of this inside of here. And whatever method works for you to be able to learn from, then awesome. But by all means, you do not need to only listen to a podcast, or you don't need to only read an ebook version, but you have different options about being able to do what works best for you. And the feedback from students from that was that it was different. It was great that they were able to actually, let's say, take their learning on the go with podcasts, because, hey, shocking, the majority of adults listen to podcasts nowadays. So why wouldn't we incorporate that inside of our learning experiences? I don't know. I think it should be a normal part of learning experiences nowadays. But anyway, you can do this for your own courses and trainings as well, with being able to provide alternatives and more options. And my favorite example of this, by the way, which you can Google this, you can find it, and it really does blow my mind being able to see this, is that there was one doctoral student who he decided to wrap his entire dissertation. And as any of you know who have written your own dissertations before, these things are behemoths. They're huge. And this individual made a rap song, and you can watch it. It's on YouTube. It's amazing. So instead of submitting the typical type of dissertation and defending in the normal way, he did this in his style. And of course, people loved it because it was so different. And also, hats off to this person, because trying to be able to create some rhymes with the different types of vocabulary that he used was like, whoa, that's next level. So anyway, different ways of being able to do this is going to be awesome for your learners. The fifth principle is problem-centric. We know from research that when you give adults a real-world problem and you ask them to be able to solve it, they are far more likely to be engaged with this and want to be able to participate and try to be able to solve the problem. And something that goes hand in hand with this is that we cannot just provide content inside of a learning experience. I know that you know this because you listen to this show and you have heard me rant about this before, but if there's going to be an online learning experience and all that you do is just hit learners over the head with content after content, and then there's no action items or follow-ups or breaks or anything of the sorts to be able to give people some time to be able to go and to practice this, then it's really all going to be for nothing. They're not going to be able to retain something if you just lecture a person for hours. It's not going to work. If you think back to your college days and remember the last time you attended a lecture and it was just 2 hours of one person in front of a classroom and just speaking at you, how much did you actually remember? Probably not that much. So this is the same when it comes to learning experiences. I said online a second ago, but this is by far in-person, hybrid, online. This is everything. Is that the way that you conduct different forms of learning experiences, it should have a type of a split where there is a majority of the work that is hands-on, it is involved, it is filled with actions and tasks. And then, of course, there is the portion where it is more exploratory in nature, lecture-based, or for the content purposes of videos, recordings, webinars, podcasts, readings, whatever it is. For my types of learning experiences, I like to be able to do a 70-30 split. 70% of the time, that's when the activities and the assessments are happening. That's when there is action. That's when there is actively learning is really taking place. And then for 30% of the time, that's when it's more about the exploratory and nature section, the readings, the videos, the podcasts, the everything of that type of a sort, or if it's going to be a lecture based or something along those lines. It's not always perfect. It's not always going to be a 70-30 split, but I really aim to be able to have that take place, especially nowadays where people don't get that. And it's usually, here's your hour-long video, go do a multiple choice question at the end. And you're like, yeah, that's great. Like that's not going to help me. So that is going to be something that you can focus on, is putting more activities, more assessment, more hands-on practical types of guidance, and a little bit less of the lecture-based material. Still important, but you need to be able to factor in that consideration. And our sixth and final principle is intrinsic motivation. This comes from the work of Dr. Carol Dweck from her research out of Stanford, which is talking about the growth mindset idea. And the more and more, essentially, that you believe in yourself and your abilities, the more that you are able to find that motivation and to think about your goals and to monitor your own progress, that growth, and realize it's possible to be able to do. It's actually not that far away. So trying to be able to instill that into our participants, well, that's going to be crucial. The more momentum that we can allow them to be able to build up, the more that they're going to be successful. And that's just science. Now, why is growth mindset so important for courses and for trainings? Think about all of the different types of things that you have had to go through as an employee and you just didn't finish them. Or let's say that you're a self-directed learner and you have signed up for course after course, or you have taken MOOC after MOOC on edX or any of those other different forms of learning platforms, and you never finish them. How many books are on your bookshelf where you're like, yeah, I'm going to finish that someday? Probably quite a bit. I am, by all means, guilty about that. But when you realize about the end goal in mind and what you're trying to be able to do, and you're seeing and monitoring your own growth and your own progress by taking step by step by step inside of the learning experience, well, that's huge, because that's going to build up that self-efficacy, that momentum, that self-confidence, and it's going to want to make you actually finish, which is a crucial component when it comes to learning experiences. But what do we do for learning experience to be able to support people? We can have a variety of things, of making sure that we are doing check-ins with our students and with our learners. We can have the opportunity to be able to provide feedback and praise, or perhaps for critiquing, room for improvement. We can have different forms of weekly types of live sessions, or for weekly check-ins, or anything else of a sort, to be able to get a feel, to get a sense about how things are going. Are people still feeling motivated? Do they feel like they're lost and confused? Can we help them in a different type of way? This is why, by the way, that I love to do at least once a week types of workshops and check-ins with my students for my courses. Because sure enough, I might have one sense, and then from actually talking with with students where I'm like, oh, nope, they need more support. I need to do more information. I need to do more guidance to be able to help them with everything. And sometimes you have an idea about this, and other times you don't. You simply just don't always know how things are going to go. So being able to make sure that you can think about how you can actually support your students and your learners, that is going to once again feed into intrinsic motivation. It's going to motivate people more to want to actually see everything through and make them realize that they can visualize about hitting their goals and that they're really not that far away. It just takes a bit more coaching and guidance and support, and that's what's really going to be able to help them out. Well, learning nerds, I think that I've talked at least long enough about Andragogy. I can go about this all day, every day. It is something that is so near and dear to my heart. It baffles me that we don't take into consideration many of these principles for when we design learning experiences, and we need to do more. We need to get better about trying to be able to do these things, because when you do, I think this is like the biggest thing, is that when you do these things and you do them right and you do things well, the results are fantastic. It is night and day difference compared to essentially doing the typical types of things of winging it or not really using learning sciences or best practices or whatever. Obviously, you're not going to do that. You know what to do now, but you're going to encounter some different forms of trainings and courses and whatnot that you need to be able to take for your job or for school or for whatever requirements. And you're going to notice and being like, wow, why didn't you ask me about this? Why didn't we actually talk about X? Why can't I have the option to be able to do Y? And if you don't, well, then most likely Andragogy was not considered as a part of the overall design. If you want to take a further deep dive into Andragogy with me, this is actually one of the first parts about Instructional Design Institute. In week 1, we cover analysis and we cover Andragogy at the same time. They 100% go hand in hand because, as you can tell, there's quite a bit of research that is involved there. So if that sounds interesting to you and you want to be able to learn more, once again, December 11th is when the next cohort does start. Be sure to apply today, and I will be reaching back out to you if everything does look great from there. And folks, a tremendous thank you to you for listening, for being with me on this journey. Some of you have been with me on this journey since 2020 and you have never left, which is absolutely insane that you are still listening to me all these years later. But I am so thrilled. I am so thankful. And I love being able to hear more from you about what you want to hear next on the show. So if you have not yet already done so, connect with me on LinkedIn and tell me about what exactly are you currently going through? What are you struggling with? Give me more podcast ideas. I can talk all day, every day. I think you know that at this point in time. As long as you give me some guidance about what path you want me to go down to be able to share with you, I am more than happy. I am an open book when it comes to being able to help you out along your instructional design journey. As always, leave this podcast a 5-star review wherever you are listening. A bunch of you started submitting the Apple Podcast reviews lately. Thank you once again. I really, really appreciate it. I read every single one of your reviews. If you have not yet already done so, of course, be sure to leave a review today. The SME course starts October 30th. That's really not that far away. We're approaching that very soon. If you have not yet done so, be sure to check that out. And of course, if you have any questions about that course in any way, shape, or form, please feel free. Reach out to me. You can always contact me, like I said, LinkedIn or via email, luke@drlukehobson.com. But hey, that is all I have for you. Stay nerdy out there, and I'll talk to you next time.